Good evening tonight, and we begin with a warning the world cannot ignore. Across Venezuela, a nation once rich with promise now stands as a living example of what happens when democracy weakens, when the voice of the people is replaced by fear. Opposition leaders are calling it very dangerous, not just for Venezuela, but for every nation watching what unfolds next. The warning begins with the government's tightening grip. In recent months, opposition gatherings have been met with arrests. Critics say freedom itself has become a risk. Speaking out can cost you your job, your safety, even your family. The leader's phrase, very dangerous way, wasn't aimed at headlines, it was aimed at survival. Because when people grow too afraid to speak, silence becomes the loudest sound of all. Walk through the streets and you'll see what that silence looks like. Closed shops, empty shelves, faces lined with exhaustion. Once vibrant marketplaces now stand half empty, a reminder of inflation that has turned everyday essentials into luxuries. Parents clutch paychecks that no longer buy a week's worth of food. The national currency, once a point of pride, now drifts between worthlessness and memory. Economists call it collapse. Families call it despair. But even in despair, there is something else, a dangerous kind of resilience. People adapting to crisis, learning to live without the things that once defined normal life. It's the mother who walks miles to find insulin for her child, the teacher who still shows up unpaid because the children deserve hope, the reporter who whispers the truth into a phone, knowing that every call could be traced. This is what dangerous means in Venezuela today, not only the presence of fear, but the persistence of courage. Internationally, the alarm bells are getting louder. Human rights groups warn that Venezuela's current state represents more than just internal turmoil. It's a signal flare for the world. When institutions crumble, when checks and balances disappear, when leaders begin to rewrite the rules to remain in power, this is the outcome. What was once a democracy now teeters between authoritarian control and humanitarian collapse. For those who have fled, the warning takes on another meaning. The Venezuelan diaspora, millions scattered across neighboring countries, carry stories of what they left behind: the hunger, the blackouts, the uncertainty. Each departure is a quiet act of both surrender and defiance, proof of how very dangerous life has become for those who stay, and how unthinkable it is for those who cannot return. And yet, even amid crisis, the people of Venezuela refuse to vanish from their own story. There are whispers of renewal. Communities organizing local aid, underground journalists publishing the facts, young people daring to dream of elections that matter again. The opposition leader's warning was not meant to extinguish hope. It was meant to save it. He wanted the world to look closer, to see that this isn't just Venezuela's struggle. It's a mirror, reflecting what happens when democracy drifts into darkness while the global community looks away. In the capital city of Caracas, the halls of government still echo with speeches about unity and progress, but outside those marble walls, the reality is written in frustration and fear. Judges who once ruled independently now rule cautiously, their decisions shadowed by political pressure. Legislators who challenge authority are silenced or stripped of power. Even elections, once a proud symbol of Venezuelan sovereignty, are now questioned by the very citizens they are meant to serve. When ballots become theater and outcomes are predetermined, democracy becomes little more than a performance. It did not happen overnight. It began quietly. A few laws rewritten, a few opponents removed, a few protests banned in the name of security. The world watched as the checks and balances weakened, each one falling like dominoes. And by the time the alarm bells rang, the system was already compromised. Now, the lines between government, military, and judiciary have blurred. Loyalty to the people has been replaced by loyalty to the few. And in that space, fear thrives. "Why are living inside a democracy that no longer protects us?" said one former lawmaker now living in exile. His voice, like so many others, carries both anger and sorrow. He speaks of colleagues detained for dissent, newspapers forced to close for printing the truth, and citizens punished for demanding change. Each story adds to the growing chorus of those who say Venezuela's political structure no longer serves its citizens, it controls them. And yet, amid this erosion, there's a haunting sense of normalcy. Daily life goes on. People still go to work, children still go to school, and evening news still plays on the air. Carefully curated, perfectly polished, never too critical. That's the most dangerous part when control becomes routine, when silence feels safe. The opposition leader who sounded the alarm called this the invisible collapse. Because when the lights of democracy fade slowly, the world adjusts its eyes, and soon, darkness feels familiar. The international community has condemned Venezuela's government for its manipulation of power, but inside the country, citizens know that words of concern mean little without action. The government dismisses critics as foreign agents, traitors, or liars. Meanwhile, The institutions that once upheld justice and accountability now act as instruments of repression. Courtrooms that once defended the Constitution now defend the regime. Laws that once guaranteed freedom are rewritten to justify control. And every day that passes, the distance between the people and their government widens. In neighborhoods across Venezuela, conversations have changed. People speak in whispers, not because they have nothing to say, but because they know who might be listening. Teachers remind students to be careful what you post. Journalists trade encrypted messages instead of open reports. Even families learn to censor themselves at the dinner table. Democracy is not only lost in the chambers of government, it's lost in the spaces where people once felt safe to speak freely. "We used to believe our vote could change something," said a young activist in Maracaibo. "No, we're just hoping our voices don't disappear too." That sentiment has become the quiet heartbeat of a country in crisis, a rhythm of resilience beneath the weight of repression. Venezuela's decline is more than a political story, it's a human one. It's the story of how power, when unchecked, corrodes trust and reshapes a nation's soul. And tonight, as the world looks on, Venezuela stands as a warning. The collapse of democracy rarely begins with explosions or revolutions. It begins with applause. For those who promise stability at any cost, the danger is not in the fall itself, but in how easily it's accepted. And in Venezuela, that acceptance has already rewritten the meaning of freedom. This is the new reality for those who try to tell Venezuela's story. Newsrooms that once buzzed with energy now sit half empty. Editors double check every sentence, weighing truth against survival. Independent radio stations have been shut down, online platforms censored, and journalists forced to choose between silence or escape. Even foreign reporters find themselves shadowed by authorities, their cameras confiscated, their footage erased. In a place where truth has become an enemy of power, journalism itself becomes an act of resistance. "They took my microphone," one reporter said, "but they can't take my voice." Those words, brave but trembling, reflect the struggle of an entire profession. Venezuela's press is no longer free, but it refuses to be broken. Reporters smuggle footage through encrypted apps, send their stories to foreign outlets, and risk arrest to ensure the world knows what is happening inside their country. For every journalist silenced, another finds a way to speak. Through text, through whispers, through the global community that still listens. Activists face the same fate. Those who march for human rights are often met with violence or vanish into detention centers without explanation. Families wait for weeks without news, clinging to hope that their loved ones are alive. The government labels them as instigators, foreign agents, or threats to peace. But these are citizens asking for electricity, medicine, and safety, not rebellion. The streets, once filled with the rhythm of protest, now echo with the heavy silence of fear. Even the act of gathering is criminalized. The right to speak has been replaced by the right to remain unseen. Social media, once a lifeline for the truth, has become both a weapon and a trap. Posts critical of the government disappear within hours. Accounts are flagged, traced, and sometimes lead directly to arrests. Yet still, people post their courage woven through coded language, emojis, and private groups. The digital underground has become the new newsroom, the new protest, the new form of survival. In a country where television is censored, truth travels by screenshot shared hand-to-hand, heart-to-heart. International observers warn that Venezuela is becoming one of the most dangerous countries in the Western Hemisphere for journalists. The pattern is chillingly familiar. Intimidation, disinformation control. It's not just the press that's under attack, it's the public's right to know. When people cannot access facts, rumors become reality and fear becomes policy. And that, experts say, is precisely the point. Control the information and you control the people. If the truth disappears, one activist said quietly, so does our future. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her identity hidden for safety. She represents the thousands who continue to fight for free speech. Teachers who distribute banned books, students who paint walls with slogans that vanish by morning, artists who hide protest in their work. Their defiance may seem small, but it is powerful, because in Venezuela today, truth itself has become the final act of rebellion. The silence spreading across the nation is not natural. It is manufactured, it is deliberate, and it is dangerous. When journalists are hunted, when activists are punished, when citizens are afraid to speak, the heart of a democracy stops beating. But even in this silence, a sound remains, the faint, persistent echo of those who refuse to give up their voice. The danger is real, the fear is constant, but the truth, no matter how hidden, is still alive, carried quietly by the brave few who continue to speak, even when no one dares to listen. Tonight, the crisis inside Venezuela is not measured by politics, it's measured by hunger, by illness, by the millions who no longer call their homeland home. The country once celebrated for its oil wealth now faces one of the deepest humanitarian crises in modern Latin American history. Shelves are empty, hospitals are without supplies, and electricity flickers in neighborhoods that used to glow through the night. The opposition leader's words, "very dangerous," echo across the nation, not just in speeches, but in the cries of families struggling to survive one more day. In cities like Caracas and Maracaibo, the crisis has become routine. Lines for bread stretch around the block, and markets that once overflowed with food now sell scraps for inflated prices. Inflation has turned the national currency into paper with no value. A month's salary often buys only a day's worth of groceries. People trade food on the black market, barter for medicine, and pray for light when power cuts last for hours. Sometimes days. For millions, survival is no longer a goal. It's a daily negotiation with fate. Hospitals, once the pride of Venezuela's public health system, now resemble war zones. Doctors work by flashlight. Shelves that once held antibiotics now sit bare. Mothers cradle their sick children in waiting rooms that smell of disinfectant and despair. Many patients die not because their illnesses are incurable, but because the medicine simply doesn't exist. Nurses have fled, doctors have emigrated, and those who remain are left to fight an invisible enemy: scarcity. The crisis has no borders, no political side. It touches everyone, quietly, cruelly, endlessly. We used to lie. Now we just wait, says a father holding his malnourished son outside a collapsed clinic. His words are not angry, just empty. Behind him, a faded mural still reads, "Venezuela for all." But for most, that promise has long been broken. Hunger has become the country's silent epidemic. Children faint in classrooms. Elderly citizens collapse on sidewalks. Families search garbage bins for fruit peels or stale bread. The government denies famine. But the evidence is written on every face, every hollow stare, every trembling hand reaching for food that isn't there. And while the crisis deepens, the exodus grows. Over 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country, crossing borders into Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and beyond. They travel on foot, carrying everything they own: photographs, passports, hope. Mothers push strollers through jungles and rivers. Fathers carry infants across bridges. Children walk barefoot for miles. They leave not out of choice, but out of necessity. They are the faces of one of the largest migration crises the Western Hemisphere has ever seen. Their departure is both a tragedy and a message. When people choose exile over home, a nation is in free fall. Still, amid the suffering, there are moments of quiet defiance. Communities have learned to rebuild what the system has forgotten. Churches turn into soup kitchens. Teachers open underground classrooms. Doctors smuggle medicine from neighboring countries. These small acts of resistance, simple, human, powerful, are the heartbeat of a people refusing to surrender. "We don't want to leave," a young woman says at a bus station crowded with refugees. "We just want to live." Her words cut through the noise of departure, a reminder that this crisis is not about statistics or speeches. It's about humanity. Every number has a face, every departure a story, and while the world debates politics, Venezuelans face the unthinkable choice between staying and starving, or leaving and losing everything they've ever known. At night, when the city lights fade and silence takes over, Venezuela tells its story in shadows. The hum of generators replaces the sound of laughter. The once bustling streets grow quiet. But even in that darkness, there's a flicker, the resilience of a nation that refuses to disappear. The humanitarian crisis has broken bodies and scattered families, but it has not yet broken spirit. The people who remain hold on to a fragile hope that one day the lights will come back on, and that when they do, the world will still be watching. Tonight, the world watches Venezuela, not as a distant tragedy, but as a warning. The question for all of us is, will we listen before it's too late? Because history has shown democracy doesn't disappear overnight. It fades slowly while the world looks away. I'm David Muir. Good night.